Hello again, dear friends, and welcome back. I have been something of a student, not the best student in the world, but something of a student of what is generally called metaphysics for, oh dear, 47, 48 years, something like that, going way, way back. And so I've learned a tremendous amount, especially as for 37, in December it will be 38 years, I have been a student of a very good teacher. Excuse me, I've got an itch on my nose. Oh, sorry about that. Yes, I've been a student of Sir George King, founder of the Aetherius Society, for it's coming up to 38 years. He, without doubt, is one of the best teachers it was ever possible for me to find. I'm not here to represent him or the society. I'm talking of my own back now. Everything that I have been mainly interested in for many years has been centered around what is generally called metaphysics. I worked at London's Natural History Museum as a security warden, not in a scientific role, between 1992 and 2001, and I knew personally a number of professional scientists in the life sciences, earth sciences, paleontology, zoology, mineralogy, geology, yes, a number of different sciences, and it was very rare that I could have anything of an in-depth conversation with them about metaphysics. It became obvious to me that even if they are not aware of it, I was, that mainstream education has been specifically geared up to steer people, especially those who move into the sciences, to move people consciously away from, shall we call it, the more mystical approach to life and existence. There is a phrase that's doing the rounds at the moment. I've heard it from a number of different individuals, and I believe it to be absolutely true. And it is that we are not human beings, some of whom may have what they regard as a spiritual experience. The truth of the matter is that we are all spiritual beings. Our very nature is that of spirituality. And as we move as individuals and collectively through evolution, we go through different phases where we learn, we have different types of experiences. And mankind, such as we know ourselves now, we are currently undergoing what we call human experiences, just the same as many, many millions of years ago, the same evolving intelligences that we are went through periods of gaining animal experience. Just the same as in future generations, in future millennia, we individuals, we same consciousnesses, intelligences, will go through superhuman experience and then move on beyond that. And for trillions, quadrillions of years into the future, we individually, collectively, will continue to evolve to higher levels of evolutionary development. The one thing about this that I really want to bring attention to is that metaphysics is not an alternative to science. It is science. I regard metaphysics as being higher physics. And yet, ironically, it underpins mainstream physics. It's not an alternative. If you really want to understand science generally, as with any other subject, in order to fully understand it as much as you can, you start at square one and you work your way through the fundamentals and you build up over time. I do understand the enthusiasm, and I feel it myself, where you want to jump in the middle. I don't want to worry about the fundamentals. I want to get stuck in. Can you see it now? But behind me here I have two ukuleles, two wonderful ukuleles, and a bass guitar, and I'm learning to play a bass guitar. And I often tell myself I'm not interested in musical theory, I just want to get in there and play it, you know. And I know the feeling. Metaphysics probably more than most other things. You will not understand what a human being is, what the earth is, what the cosmos is, unless you start at square one and work your way through. You've got to be grounded. And basic metaphysical principles are the starting points in order to move later into what we might call mainstream physics. I have met some very nice people who are professional scientists, and they were educated and trained through the various schools, grammar schools and colleges, university, and possibly into areas where they had specific scientific training, whether it was in chemistry or atomic physics or whatever it might have been. But unless those people in the first instance are started with aspects of metaphysics, higher physics which underpins mainstream physics, there will be areas of their field that they will not fully understand. One of the main differences between, forgive my use of terminology, but I'm not sure what other words to use, differences between mainstream physics, as we might call it, and metaphysics is this. In mainstream physics, scientists, and I love science and I'm not knocking any scientists, I love science, I'm just trying to be honest. Many scientists, when investigating something, researching something, will initially use their 5 basic senses, bear in mind that this body here, it's an electrically driven organic robot machine. It's an organic machine. The consciousness is being channeled through, as you might say. The consciousness exists independent of this, because when this goes into the grave or gets cremated, the conscious awareness still exists. Okay, so I'm using this. It's a machine. And like a computer, it has the same sorts of things, but in organic substance. The computer has a processor. This machine has a processor, an organic processor we call the brain. The computer has input devices, a keyboard, a mouse. They used to have light pens, I don't know if they still do, but scanners for documents, etc., microphones for recording audio on the computer. It has input devices. It has output devices, a screen, a speaker, a printer, etc., etc. Okay? This is similar. It has input devices. It has light sensitive cells on the back of the eye with a lens to focus that light. It has microphones on the side of the head. It has chemically sensitive cells in the mouth and tongue and in the nose for taste and smell. And all the cells on the outside of the body have a pressure sensitivity which give touch. And the body has built within it mechanisms which detect the 5 different types of influence, or is that the right word? But each one of them is dedicated to that type of stimuli. The eyes don't allow you to hear. The ears you can't see with, etc., etc. Each one is specific. Okay, so a scientist would use the 5 basic senses. And yet they develop, or engineers develop for them, instrumentation such as an optical microscope, an electron microscope, spectroscopes, and there's a whole range, Geiger counters and whatever, and it goes on and on and on and on. There is a whole range of artificially produced instrumentation which are extensions to the 5 basic senses. Okay? The problem is that when one becomes a mystical student, part of the learning process is to get into a quiet place, close the eyes, and shut off external influences and learn how to become more aware of subtle influences. Within a human being, there are far more sense mechanisms than many of the mainstream scientists may realize. I mean, even the membranes in some of the cells can respond to influences so subtle that that even the most cleverly designed artificial instrumentation is not sensitive to respond. As a result, a living organism, like a human being, using a body like this, can be aware of and respond to influences, phenomena that mainstream science cannot measure, cannot even detect. And it takes a living organism to do it. Back in the 1950s, an elevated being from another world, a being known as a Lord of Karma, spent a great deal of time giving information that would become freely available to all of mankind. Most of it is not secret and has been publicized. The fact that a lot of people haven't taken an interest was not his problem. He made it available to us. On one occasion he gave us a meditation. A meditation is a phrase or whatever, a concept put in words, if you like, that one can think about. Text come in. Sorry about that, that's my text on my mobile. A concept or a phrase, I should have switched my phone off, that one can think about in depth, can contemplate and bring out through reason and logic other thoughts which you might say were hidden beneath the surface. Okay? This meditation describes exactly what I'm saying. I'll just add one more thing and then I'll tell you the phrase and you'll see how relevant it is. This organic robot body is made essentially of solid, liquid and gaseous material, as we would normally call them. Bear in mind, of course, that it isn't solid, but that's just a name we give it, a classification to certain types of material or matter. Solid, liquid and gaseous material. Surrounding it and permeating it, there are two categories or classifications of more subtle matter that is just as physical as the solid, liquid and gases are. They are often referred to as etheric and superetheric matter, and those are the two forms of matter that primarily form what is known as the aura. The aura extends outside of the body like this and permeates the body, and every cell in your body is reproduced in the etheric and superetheric matter of your aura. I have been giving contact spiritual healing for 37, almost 38 years, so I've developed a certain sensitivity in the hands. If I bring my hands together like this, there, I can feel where the aura of this hand and the aura of that hand come together in the midpoint there, and I can physically feel the pressure on my hands as the two etheric, superetheric auras come together. It's physical matter. That aura, like a field of energy, has in its surface energy vortices, which are known in Eastern philosophy as chakras. Energy vortices which physically exist. Some of those chakras, as they are called, psychic centers, some of them radiate energy out, some of them have a sensitivity and can take energy in that sometimes you may consciously register as in fact giving healing. I do. You know, I'm aware of the energies flowing when I give contact spiritual healing. But those psychic centers or chakras are picking up on subtle influences that my 5 basic senses are totally unaware of. Okay? And it goes beyond that. That's only the start of it. Back to the meditation. This Lord of Karma said, if I can remember it, I think I can get it more or less right. When a man looketh through his eyes, he seeth naught but the reflection of the lesser life. When he looketh not through his eyes, but through his eye, he seeth not the reflection, but the life itself. When he looketh not through his eyes, nor through his eye, but through the Brahmic principle, which is the energy center, the chakra at the top of the head, the crown chakra, which is from where we get the Christian halo. When he looketh through the Brahmic principle, he seeth not the reflection, nor the life, but that, and so it is. I'll just say that again because I interrupted it in the middle. When a man looketh through his eyes, he seeth naught but the reflection of the lesser life. When a man looketh not through his eyes but through the eye, he seeth not the reflection but the life itself. When a man looketh not through his eyes nor his eye, but through the Brahmic principle, he seeth not the reflection nor the life, but that, and so it is. Okay? Let me explain what that means. If I was to look at this desk now, or if someone else was here and I said, look at that desk and tell me what you see, most people would say, well, I see the desk. Actually, you don't. It's physically impossible with these eyes to see that desk. You can't. Got a hair on my head. The desk is made of atoms, subatomic particles arranged in molecules. The eyes with which I'm looking register light. They don't register atoms. What I am seeing is that light which comes in through the window now hits the desk and reflects off. And I am seeing a visible light representation of the desk. But I cannot see the substance of the desk. I'm not seeing the matter. I'm seeing the reflection in light of the desk. A couple who may have been married for 60 years or more have never actually seen each other. All they see with their eyes is the light reflecting off the other person. A representation of the person, they see the reflection. When a person who becomes a mystical student and a yoga student, and I want to say religiously, performs the breathing and visualization exercises to train themselves with discipline to quieten the body down, to quieten the 5 basic senses down, take the consciousness within the body and become aware of more subtle forces. They become aware of what the chakras are picking up on a far more subtle level. People who are regarded as psychic can usually do this. If a psychic is here and a discarnate person walks into the room, most of the time you will not be able to see them with the physical eyes. A psychic may see a discarnate person, a ghost if you will, walk into the room and they will physically see that person, even though they're invisible to normal sight. But what they are looking at, as far as their consciousness is concerned, is the energy pattern of their form, which is picked up through the chakras. And the basic subconscious mind, okay, which is the body's operating system, like a computer's operating system, but it's the system within the body. It converts those energetic vibrations into electrical activity, which are fed to the brain, and the visualization enters into the conscious mind, and the person says, I can see this ghost, this discarnate person. Okay, if I was to do this, I'm not there yet, but I'm working at it. If I was able to do this, and I sat here, closed my eyes, and I took my body into a trance state where I could start to look through the chakras, and when I'm able to do this eventually, I will be able to look at the desk. The chakras don't pick up on visible light. They don't see the reflection. What do they see? You can actually directly perceive the atoms, subatomic particles, the molecules. You can see the actual matter of the substance, not the reflection of it. So you don't see the reflection, you see what this great master called the life. There is life force within everything, and when you psychically look, you see the life force which is within everything, even those things that we consider inanimate. When a person is evolved enough, and there are very few people on the planet that this refers to, even though there are many, many claims. When a person is able to go into the deepest trance state known as samadhi at will, I won't go into the actual process, but they can control the energies in the body so acutely that they can raise their consciousness so they're not even looking through here. they're looking through the highest center, the crown chakra. You may be able to see something of this when you can raise the consciousness to the third eye, to the Christ or brow chakra. But when you get to those sorts of stages, when you look at manifestation around you, existence, one has a realization that the only thing that exists is that thing that we call God, and there is nothing else. Brahma is one of the many names of God, and this is the Brahmic principle, the realization that the only thing that exists is God. There isn't anything else. Countless billions of years ago, in the distant past, that non-physical consciousness, spirit, as some call it, it visualized the beginnings of the cosmos. It brought the cosmos into its first stages as a visualization. And the fabric, if you like, of that visualization, that vast field of influence, because there is no substance to it, it's a thought form. It doesn't have substance. It is a field of influence. When that was first visualized, it was fairly static. There was no movement. And therefore, it is what we might call dark and cold. And still, there was no movement. That non-physical consciousness, which is God, the creative force or source behind all things, used its willpower to cause that field of influence, which we now call ether, to cause parts of it to start vibrating, to move, and move differently in different places. And vibrations were set up in that field of influence, ether. Some of those vibrations formed into standing wave patterns, and some of those standing wave patterns we call subatomic particles. Other vibrations or wave fronts travelled through that field of influence, and we refer to some of them as light and radio waves, travelling waves, as opposed to standing waves which vibrate but stay essentially, you might say, the same shape. They may move in spatial coordinates but keep their shape, and this is what subatomic particles do, like electrons, for example. An electron stays as an electron even though it moves where it is. You know what I mean? And it's a standing wave vibration of the ether. Okay? What I'm trying to get at here is that metaphysics is physics. It is science. It's not an alternative to science. It's the background to science. There are astronomers who look through their telescopes, and I'm not knocking them, but they look at planets and they look at stars and they look at distant galaxies with the Hubble telescope, etc. And they see planets and stars and galaxies. But through that type of observation, you cannot deduce what it is you're actually looking at. I could go into a whole 2-3 hour talk on how they came about, but we haven't got time this time. I'll just mention one thing, and so you can see some of the so-called religious texts are actually dealing with metaphysics. They're dealing with physics. Okay? There's a statement that's made in the creation account in the Bible, and it's metaphysics. It's advanced metaphysics. let me explain the actual situation, and then I'll go to the reference and you can see the correlation. Okay? That non-physical consciousness, spirit if you like, which is not itself manifested, therefore you can't see it, because all of our senses in all of our bodies, all they can detect is movement of the ether, and that's it. And you cannot detect anything except movement of ether. Spirit, which is not in manifestation, therefore, is quite invisible to us. Okay? Right. Spirit, God if you will, visualized the volume of what we would call space within which it was going to operate. And we have a vast field of ether, a field of influence that wasn't moving. That consciousness then used an influence called willpower to cause portions of that field of ether to start moving and vibrating. Whenever movement occurs, and I mean movement of any type, at any level, any movement at all, you get two other byproducts that are always there, and the three things cannot be separated. In a similar way that those are into electrical things, as I was electrically trained, we have a thing called Ohm's law, where we have voltage, current and resistance. The three things are related, and we draw them or write them down in a triangle, and it shows us how they relate to each other in the corners of the triangle. So too with this. We have movement, and movement produces sound and light. Sound, light and movement cannot be separated ever. Whenever light travels into a room, for example, it has sound associated with it, even though your ears might not pick it up. It's still sound. The noise that I am making by pumping out air pressure waves that we call sound, if you had the right type of what we might call psychic sight, and you were watching from the side here, you would see light, colours, geometric shapes in the air vibrations which are associated with the sound I'm making. All sound has light associated with it, even though it's not within the range of your eyes. And sound, light and movement are inseparable. All light has sound, all sound has light. Sound and light are movement. Okay? They cannot be separated. Okay. And the last thing, and then I'll give you the phrase. You can see it's mentioned in the Bible in its Metaphysics. The field of ether that surrounds us, that of which our bodies are made, of which everything is made, because everything is purely ether in motion. There is only ether, there's nothing else. All the different chemical elements and compounds are just ether with different vibrations imposed on it. You know? Okay, like, you know, different chords on a musical scale, different combinations of notes. These different combinations of vibration make up helium, hydrogen, you know, or whatever, or a lump of plutonium, whatever. It's ether with different vibrations, and it's that simple. And there are harmonics, by the way, and octaves, harmonics and octaves too. You know, like any frequency of vibration, there are harmonics and there are octaves. So there is in manifestation. Hence the dark matter, which is just higher octaves of vibration. There's nothing complex about it. But the ether itself, in the way that it, shall we say, behaves, is very much like water. If you have your fish tank in the room, and you have a little pump to aerate the water, watch the bubbles moving up through the water. In our normal way of thinking, the water is denser than the air in the bubbles. and yet the bubbles have no problem moving through the water. Okay? Water can have pressure differences. If in the ocean there is more pressure at a lower level because you've got the weight of the water on top, so it can have pressure zones. Water will conduct vibrations, sound will travel through water, and you can get streams, rivers under the sea. I mean, I come from Grimsby on the south bank of the River Humber, and coming in through the mouth of the Humber from the North Sea, I don't know if they're still there, I'm sure they are, but there used to be some streams, some rivers under the Humber River, and I believe they were called the Grimsby Roads. But it's currents in the water. So too can ether conduct currents, streams of flow, within its makeup. So it basically behaves like water, but you can think of it as a higher octave of water, because in our normal way of thinking, it's far more subtle. Okay, now we'll come to a statement in the Bible, and I'll explain what I believe it means. The phrase is, "The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." And a lot of people have scratched their head. Just a minute, at that point in the proceedings, God hasn't yet created anything. What water? There isn't any water. He hasn't created any water yet. Let's look at it as a metaphysical concept. The Spirit of God, that's the consciousness of God using willpower to affect the field of ether. The ether was already there. Ether behaves like water. It was static in the beginning until God, using willpower, caused it to move or vibrate. Okay? The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The face is the bit you see. If you were there, you could see it. It's the face, the bit facing you. Okay? That you could see. The non-physical consciousness, which is God, used willpower to cause movement in the water-like ethers. It moved upon the face of the waters. It caused movement that you could see. And that's what it means. And it's advanced metaphysics. It's science. You see, once you begin to understand what's behind it, it's science. It's advanced science. In fact, in the late, so I'm trying to think what year it was. I can't remember what year it was. It was either the end of the 50s, it might have been 60 or 61, but it might have just been before that. I can't remember. Late 50s, early 60s. I can't remember the actual year off the top of my head. But the man I regard as my teacher, Sir George King, founder of the Aetherius Society, took some information from, believe it or not, a Martian intelligence. Sir George King was invited on board a spacecraft, a mothership in orbit of Earth at the time, and he had certain things explained to him. And one of them is how this process works. And it was tied up in a neat little phrase. Okay? Just look again at what I was saying, and then I'll give you a phrase that explains it very succinctly. And it's science. It's physics. Non-physical consciousness or spirit, which isn't manifested itself, can use an influence called willpower, will, to cause the ether to vibrate. If the ether is already vibrating, you can, using willpower, modify that vibration. This is how we make things, like this tripod with a camera on it. It's manufactured. Somebody changed the vibrations of the ethers to produce this. Okay? Right. Hang on. Make sure I'm following this right. Non-physical consciousness uses willpower to cause the ether to move. When you get movement of the ethers, it moves in 3 dimensions of length, breadth and height, and it changes through time. And it's quite simple. One thing I haven't mentioned, and I don't want to confuse anyone, but let me just say one of the things that I haven't yet added. The field of ether, in a similar way to basic substance, ether has certain characteristics. There are things that ether can do, and there are things that ether can't do. And within that vast field of influence that we call the ethers, which is the basis of all manifestation, there are certain potentials. Things that you can make the ether do, things that it can't do. There is a field of potential within that ether. That potential is what we should refer to as mind. Mind is not something that comes from the brain. The potential in the ether is very much to us like a radio wave is to a radio receiver. Part of the brain function is like the mental equivalent of a radio receiver, and it picks up on the patterns of potential that exist in the ether. So when you visualize something, it's because the brain has tuned into certain types of vibration and you become aware of it and you regard it as a thought. Okay? So mind is the pattern of potential within the ethers, which itself is not yet manifested, but you can bring it into being. You can visualize it when the brain picks up those patterns, and like again with the tripod and the camera, someone visualized the camera, visualized the tripod, and they manufactured it according to that visualization. But the pattern for that was already existent as potential in the ether. In other words, you can't create anything original, you can only bring through the patterns that are already there. Okay? Come back to the phrase. I'm sorry I'm labouring this point, but if you understand this, it goes a long way to understanding everything else. Will is the influence imposed by spirit on ether, actually on mind, which is the potential within ether, to bring it into being as vibrations in length, breadth and height varying through time. The phrase that was given by the Martian intelligence was, will imposes those conditions upon mind which bring its potential into manifestation as directed motion in a time frame of length, breadth and height. And it's that simple. Non-physical consciousness or spirit used its willpower, and it has produced this. This. Are you listening, man from the Isle of Wight? You know who I mean. It's not a hologram. It's a thought form. Intelligences, consciousnesses have tuned into the ethers, picked up on the patterns of potential in the ethers, and by physical activity or mental activity they have brought those potentials into being as what we call physical matter, but it actually only exists as vibrations of the ether. Standing wave patterns, which we call subatomic particles, travelling waves like light and radio waves, etc. Okay? And that's how it comes about. So metaphysics is physics. The only other point I really need to deal with in this, because this is only just, a basic explanation, an intro to metaphysics, if you like. The other thing I need to mention, in the same way that there is only one substance, it's not substance really, but ether, the field of influence. Let's just call it substance for the moment with a little s, Ether is the only thing that exists. And that is the fabric of the visualization that God made and is holding in being. So there is only one substance, ether. There is only one law which governs it. Childishly simple. In the beginning, from the first billionth of a second, there was only one law that governs what can and can't happen. One law. Simple. Action and reaction are opposite and equal. It's that simple. I was trained in electronics in the Air Force. When I play around with anything electrical, I'm going to sneeze. I'm quite familiar with Ohm's law. I've done a lot of personal work with electrical stuff. I built things and, worked out values of resistors and time constants and all this sort of stuff, with basic electronics. I'm familiar with Ohm's law. Whatever law of physics science deduces, whether it's gas laws, electromagnetic laws, whether it's to gravity, whether it's to do with heat, the dynamics of liquids or whatever it might be, every one of those laws of physics is quite simply action and reaction being opposite and equal in different situations. And that law of action and reaction being opposite and equal is all, all present. Everything operates within it. It's immutable. It's a law that you cannot get outside of. This is where, in terms of human thoughts and actions, 2,000 or so years ago, a very great teacher came out with the phrase, very simple, as you sow, so shall you reap, which also brings about what goes around comes around, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Yes, it's an absolute law, and you can't get round it, period, because everything in manifestation operates within that law. It's known in Eastern philosophy as karma. Okay? It's a law of physics, law of God if you will. It's a fixed law. Two of the things that science will look for validation, as many of them have said, and I've heard them say this, you don't have a science unless you can express it in numbers. And the other thing, of course, is repeatability. The law of karma is absolute. It's a law that does not change. And it works at absolutely all levels, from the forces within an electron to the forces operating between clusters of galaxies, and it operates at all levels. Action and reaction are opposite and equal, period. It's an absolute law, and if you knew enough about it, you could express that. You can express anything, even if it's a ghost haunting an old mansion. Doesn't matter what it is. Anything at all levels can be expressed in numbers if you know enough about it. It's science. It's just that some of it is, shall we say, more subtle, and people tend to ignore it. The other thing, of course, is repeatability. But just a minute. For hundreds of thousands of years ago, 400s of thousands of years, there have been many serious yoga students who have broken away from a more materialistic approach, used their own subtle faculties to see the world in a more real way, and every one of them has become aware of exactly the same things. How much repeatability do you want? In fact, one of the ways of discriminating something that is true or real and something that isn't, again coming back to Sir George King, whom to call him a Western master of yoga was a gross understatement, he came out with a phrase a number of times, but he summed up something which people have questioned throughout the ages: what is truth? And Sir George King quite plainly said, because this was a man who knew, he said, truth is that which does not change. Of course it doesn't. How can anything change and still be real? It can't. If it's different now to what it was then, how can it be real? If it's real, it's got to stay the same. You know, the great concepts through life, the laws which govern the universe, the more profound things, they don't change. It's always the same. Same as it was billions of years ago, the same as it will be trillions of years in the future. The great truths of life don't change. Karma doesn't change. The way it responds to situations changes, yes, but the law itself is still the same. Truth doesn't change. The word reality is synonymous with truth, because reality is the truth of existence. If truth is that which does not change, reality is that which does not change. But the whole cosmos is in a state of continual motion. Motion is movement through time, is change through time. So if every aspect of the cosmos is in a state of change, and reality is that which does not change, none of it is real. It isn't. It's an illusion. It's not a hologram. It's a thought form. You see. So there you go. The point I wanted to get across here is that metaphysics is science. It's physics. But much of it, one is dealing with subtle influences, far too subtle for our crude, artificially produced instrumentation to register, and much of what goes on, the phenomena, the flows of energies, great tides of energies, etc., they may be very powerful, but some of them are still subtle, and it takes a living organism to tune in and become aware of them. And that is why there seems to be a difference between metaphysics and mainstream physics. But metaphysics is real. Okay? I think I've gone on about it enough, so I'm going to call it quits, but it's basically just an intro to metaphysics. Okay? So if you've got any questions, you know where I am. Okay? And again, thank you very much. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thank you, my dear friends.